A truck ran a red light and put me in a hospital bed 6 weeks after I gave birth. My husband was 6 hours away. My mother lived 20 minutes from that hospital, and when he begged her to come sit with my newborn for one night, she said no, because she had to watch my sister's cat while my sister was on a cruise. I want you to sit with that for 1 second, because I did. And then, lying in that bed with 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung, I picked up my phone with my one good hand, and in about 20 seconds, I ended something that had been quietly bleeding me dry for 9 years and $486,000. That's not even the part that broke them. The part that broke them walked through my hospital door 3 hours later, carrying a folder older than my marriage. Welcome back to the channel where the quiet ones finally close the account. If you've ever been the responsible one in your family, the one nobody worries about because you always land on your feet, this story is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. Stick around because by the end of this video, a spreadsheet is going to do something 1,000 arguments never could. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss it, and drop a comment telling me who actually showed up for you when you fell. Let's get into it. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was the family member everyone quietly relied on and nobody quietly thanked. 6 weeks before the worst night of my life, I gave birth to my daughter, Lily. She was small and warm and had this way of gripping my finger like she'd already decided I was hers to hold on to. I was still moving carefully, still healing, still waking up every 3 hours to feed her when I finished a late shift and got in my car to drive home on Route 9. I don't remember the impact. I remember the color of the light changing from green to something else, in my peripheral vision, and then I remember waking up in a curtained bay in the emergency room with a nurse saying my name like she'd already said it several times. My right arm was in a cast. My ribs felt like someone had parked a car on my chest, 3 of them broken, along with a punctured lung. My husband, Ryan, was on a business trip in Seattle, a full 6 hours away by flight and layover. He was on speakerphone on the pillow next to my head, and I could hear the specific tone in his voice he only uses when he's terrified and trying not to let it show. "Claire," he said, "the sitter can't stay past 11. I called your mom." I already knew before he said the next part. Some part of me had known for years, actually, and just hadn't let myself look at it directly. "She won't come." There was a pause, and underneath that pause, I heard something that made my stomach drop even through the anesthesia haze. The unmistakable electronic chime of a slot machine paying out, and the low murmur of a casino floor. My mother, Diane, was at Silver Creek with her girlfriends, and when Ryan told her their granddaughter needed someone, anyone, for one night, she told him she couldn't leave because she had to cat sit while my sister Sydney was on a Caribbean cruise. A cat. My 6-week-old daughter needed a person, and the answer was a cat. I want to be honest with you about something because I think it matters. I didn't cry. Everyone expects the woman in the hospital bed to fall apart, and I didn't, because I had a very specific kind of training for moments like this. I looked at the plastic ID band cinched around my left wrist, and then I reached over with my one working hand and pulled my phone off the tray table. I had things to take care of. I was always very, very good at taking care of things. That, it turns out, was the entire problem. Understand why my family treated me the way a faucet treats an empty glass? You need to understand where I came from. I grew up in a rented duplex in Millbrook, in a house where the heat worked when it felt like working. I paid my way through community college on grocery store closing shifts, transferred on a scholarship, and clawed my way into a finance program nobody in my family understood or particularly cared about. By 30, I was a senior financial analyst at a Fortune 500 company, the person they put in the room when the numbers absolutely had to be right. Numbers don't play favorites. They don't smile at you and then choose someone else. That's more than I could say for the people I grew up with. Ryan and I married when I was 26. We waited on kids, partly because we wanted to, and partly because there was always something the family needed first. We lived quietly below our means. 2 incomes, 1 car, no debt. That discipline is the only reason what I'm about to tell you was even financially possible. For 9 years, I had been sending my parents $4,500 a month. I never said that number out loud to a single living person. Not my husband, not my sister, nobody. I told myself it was for my father's heart condition and the mortgage. I told myself I was simply the only one steady enough to carry it. And somewhere along the way, being the steady one had quietly become my entire identity. I wasn't naive. I was responsible to the point of self-erasure, and there is a real difference between the two. That night, from a hospital bed, I finally learned what that difference cost me. The very first thing I did was not revenge. The first thing I did was solve the actual problem in front of me, because that's simply what I do. With my left thumb, I pulled up a licensed overnight care agency Ryan and I had vetted months earlier and never ended up needing. A woman answered on the second ring. I gave her my name, my situation, and my address in 9 sentences, calm as a Tuesday afternoon. I need a night nurse for a 6-week-old starting now. Is the baby medically stable? She's perfect. I'm the one in the hospital. 40 minutes later, a nurse named Yvette let herself into my house with the door code Ryan gave her, washed her hands, and texted me a photo of Lily asleep with her tiny fist against her cheek. I stared at that photo for a long time. An ER nurse beside me watched me set the phone down and asked gently if I had any family who could come. It's handled, I said. Next. She blinked. People always blink when you don't perform the breakdown they were braced for. I wasn't being cold. I was triaging the way you learn to when you spent your whole life being the only functioning adult in a room full of adults. My daughter was safe. My husband was in the air. My ribs would knit back together on their own schedule. There was exactly one item left on my list that night. One thing I'd carried silently for 9 years and never once allowed myself to examine. And now my hand was free, and my mind, strangely, had never been clearer. I opened my banking app. The login screen glowed in that dark Kernan bay like a small, cold moon. Inside, there was a page called Recurring Transfers, 4 of them. I knew each one the way you know a scar. Mom and Dad, $2,000 month. Home, $500 labeled for the mortgage I believed I was helping cover. Dad medical, $900. Sydney support, $500. $4,500 on the first of every month for 108 months. I'd set the first one up at 25, the night my father called me sobbing about a hospital bill. I had never once let myself add up the total because the total felt like a door I couldn't walk back through. So lying there, I made myself look. The app didn't flinch doing the math. $486,000, nearly $500,000 gone out of my life, one quiet automated transfer at a time, while my mother told every relative in earshot that we've always managed on our own. I pressed cancel on the first transfer. A green check mark appeared, along with 4 words I will remember until the day I die. Recurring transfer canceled. I pressed the second. Canceled. The third. The fourth. 4 taps. Maybe 20 seconds total. And 9 years simply stopped. The way a faucet stops when you finally turn the handle. I felt no triumph in that moment, and honestly, no grief either. Just a strange, flat clarity, like the exact moment a spreadsheet finally balances after hours of not balancing. Then, closing the app, my eyes caught on something buried in the transaction history I'd never bothered scrolling back to before. One line, filed under the Dad medical label from 2 years earlier. Loan, S $40,000. Not my father's surgery. My sister's initial, Sydney. I locked the phone and lay there in the dark, listening to the heart monitor count out my pulse, and I finally let myself ask the question I'd avoided for 9 years. Why had I done it? The easy answer, the one strangers offer, is that I was pushover starving for approval. That answer is wrong, and if you've ever been the dependable one in your own family, you already know why. I did it because somewhere along the way I had decided that being needed was the same thing as being safe. If I was the load-bearing wall, nobody could ever remove me from the house. My grandmother understood that about me before I ever did. Her name was Eleanor, my mother's mother. Tall and flinty, always smelling faintly of coffee and machine oil. A woman who never once had to raise her voice to control a room. The year before she died, she took my hand at Thanksgiving and said, "Somebody has to watch this family's money, and your mother won't, so it's going to have to be you." At the time, I thought she meant, "Be generous." Lying in that hospital bed, I understood she'd actually meant something much closer to be vigilant. Eleanor had passed the previous spring, quietly, in her sleep. I'd been buried in a new pregnancy in a brutal quarter at work, and I hadn't asked what she left behind or to whom. I had simply assumed my mother handled it, the same way I'd assumed $4,500 a month was quietly funding my father's medication. I had spent a lifetime assuming the best about people who had never once earned it, and calling that assumption love. Lying there with my daughter 40 minutes away in a stranger's careful hands, I finally understood. I'd spent 9 years funding a story about my family, not the actual family. The actual family had just chosen a cat. Ryan called again from his layover, and this time he repeated everything my mother had said to him, word for word, because he knew I would need it exactly that way. He'd called her around 9, explained I was in surgery, and asked her, please, to just make the 20-minute drive. She'd given him the long, theatrical sigh she reserves for moments like this, and told him she really couldn't. Sydney was finally getting her dream vacation, and someone had to watch the cat. Besides, and here it came, Claire always lands on her feet. Then she said the sentence, the one that would become the spine of this entire story. Your sister never has these emergencies. As if the truck that hit me had checked my family ranking before running the red light. As if my daughter's first night without her mother could simply wait until a cruise wrapped up. Ryan's voice cracked, telling me all of this. I told him to breathe, that Lily was fine, that I was fine, that he should get on his flight. After we hung up, I opened Instagram, which I almost never use, and there at the top was Sydney's story. A glistening turquoise pool deck, a coconut drink sweating in the sun, and a caption that read, "Living my best life, finally." My sister, 29 years old, an aspiring influencer with 11,000 followers and a $500 monthly allowance she genuinely believed came from the universe. I didn't comment. I didn't scream into the dark. Instead, I opened my messages and typed 3 words to a contact I almost never used. One saved simply as Grandpa W. We should talk. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, as though he'd been waiting 9 years for that exact text. Maybe he had. I expected Walter to write back. Instead, my phone lit up with a FaceTime call from the middle of the Caribbean Sea. Sydney. I answered with my left hand, my face half in shadow, and she never once noticed the hospital ceiling behind me. Never noticed the cast. Never asked why I was lying flat at midnight. Claire, finally, she said, holding the phone too close so I got a full tour of her sunburnt nose. My card got declined at the spa. Like, humiliating. I waited. She filled the silence the way she always does. Mom said the family account always covers me. Did you touch something? And there it was, the entire architecture of the lie in one sentence. The family account. My sister genuinely believed $500 a month simply materialized from some communal treasury our mother magically managed. She had no idea it came from me because our mother had spent 9 years making absolutely sure she never found out. I asked her evenly if she knew I'd been in a car accident. Wait, what? Are you being dramatic right now? Behind her, a steel drum band started up. Can you just fix the card? We dock in Cozumel tomorrow, and I have a shoot. A shoot. I told her I'd look into it, which was true, and that I had to go, which was also true. I hung up before she could respond and lay there in the dark with the steel drum still ringing faintly in my ears. My sister wasn't cruel, not exactly. She was something almost worse. A person who had never once been asked to imagine the well might have a bottom, because nobody had ever let her see who was carrying the bucket. The next morning, they moved me to a regular room, and that's when the family group text, the Bennett family chain, a dozen relatives, mostly silent aunts, started buzzing on my tray table. My mother had been busy. An hour earlier, she'd posted a long message that began, "I'm heartbroken to say Claire is being dramatic again and has cut her struggling parents off out of spite." She wrote about my father's fragile health, about how they'd given me everything, about not knowing how she'd cover his medicine now. She closed with, for the audience, "We've always managed on our own, but this is cruel." There it was again. Same lie, new stage. Except this time, it wasn't in my banking app. It was a performance in front of a dozen people who had no idea what the actual numbers looked like. Aunt Denise had already replied with 3 broken heart emojis. Shame on her, kicking a sick man when he's down. A cousin sent praying hands. Nobody in that chat had ever been allowed to see the truth, because the truth had never once been permitted in the room. I held the phone and felt the old reflex rise, the urge to explain, to soften it, to manage everyone's feelings the way I'd managed everything else for 9 years. Instead, I set the phone face down. Explaining was the old me. The new me, the one that had apparently been installed by a truck, wanted the numbers in the room, and I knew exactly where to find every last one of them. Ryan walked into my room the next morning, unshaven and gray with exhaustion, carrying Lily in her car seat and a diaper bag over one shoulder. He'd flown straight to the house, relieved the night nurse, and driven our daughter to me himself. For a few minutes, the 3 of us just breathed together, the only part of that entire week I would happily live again. Then my father called. Frank, 64, the man whose heart I had spent 9 years quietly funding. "Claire," he said, using a name he hadn't used since I was small. I didn't know it got this bad. The money, the accident, I didn't know. For one suspended second, I actually believed he might stand up. "I never wanted you carrying all of it," he said, and I heard him take a breath, like a man stepping off a ledge. Then, behind him, my mother's voice, sharp, low, asking who he was talking to. A muffled hand over the receiver. When he came back, his voice had already flattened and retreated. "I should go. Feel better." He hung up. That was my father in one phone call. A good man who had spent 40 years learning that the safest thing to do in that house was absolutely nothing. That afternoon, Ryan propped my laptop on the rolling table, and I did the one thing that has never once failed to steady my hands. I built a spreadsheet. With my left hand and a great deal of patience, I logged into the bank, exported 9 years of statements, and dropped everything into a pivot table. I do this for a company worth billions. I could certainly do it for my own life. I sorted the $486,000 by where it had actually landed, and the picture that assembled itself, cell by cell, was nothing like the picture my mother had painted for our relatives. The mortgage payments I believed I was covering had been applied maybe 10 times in 9 years, not 108. My father's documented medical expenses, the real cardiologist visits, the actual prescriptions, totaled roughly $65,000 across the entire period. So where had the remaining $421,000 gone? I filtered by withdrawal location and date, and a cluster lit up like a rash. Cash withdrawals, hundreds of them, almost all within a 2-mile radius of a single zip code. I pulled up the map. Silver Creek. My mother hadn't been at the casino that one unlucky night she chose to skip her own granddaughter's emergency. She had been visiting that casino for the better part of a decade, on my dime, while telling a dozen relatives she managed on her own. A second, smaller stream branched off entirely, steady, deliberate, year after year. It led to Sydney. I'm going to give you the exact numbers because I want you holding them the way I held them. Everything from this point forward turns on them. Out of $486,000, $65,000 matched real medical care, $11,000 touched the mortgage. That left roughly $410,000 unaccounted for, splitting into 2 rivers. The first river, about $290,000 over 9 years, was cash, pulled in small, dignified amounts near Silver Creek, structured so no single withdrawal would ever draw attention. The second river ran to Sydney, around $120,000, including that $40,000 loan filed under my father's surgery to hide it inside the one category nobody would ever question. Money that, it turned out, had funded a year of brand building, a leased SUV, and a photographer in Tulum. I printed the summary onto a single sheet using the hospital printer at the nurse's station. One clean page. 9 years. 12 rows. Then Ryan showed me one more thing. A screenshot he'd found scrolling the family chat from months earlier, where my mother had bragged to Aunt Denise. We covered Sydney's brand ourselves. That's what good parents do. I looked at that screenshot, and I looked at my one printed page, and something in me went very quiet and very level. I wasn't going to send an angry text. I wasn't going to explain or defend myself. I was going to let the paper into the room in front of the exact audience my mother had spent 30 years performing for, and then I was going to walk out and never fund the show again. "It's handled," I said to Ryan. For the first time, those words felt less like triage and more like a verdict. My mother discovered the transfers had stopped the way she discovered everything, the moment it cost her something. The first of the month came and went with no deposit. By noon, my phone was ringing with her name on the screen. I let it go twice. The third time I answered, because avoidance was the old me. Her voice came through warm as fresh pie, the voice she uses on relatives and waiters. "Honey, are you okay? We've been worried sick about you and that baby." Worried sick. The woman who chose a cat. I told her I was recovering, thank you. A pause. Then the warmth curdled by careful degrees into something I'd been hearing my entire life. I noticed the account didn't come through. "Is that a mix-up with a bank?" I told her it wasn't a mix-up. Silence, then the guilt, right on schedule. "After everything your father and I did for you, we took you to every practice. We kept a roof over your head." I let her run. She circled, as she always does, back to her favorite weapon, softer now, almost wounded, as if I were the unreasonable one. "You know, your sister never has these emergencies. Third time in 3 days?" This time I didn't flinch, and I didn't explain. I simply said, "I know, Mom," and let the words mean something she never intended. Sydney never had emergencies because Sydney had me, and now Sydney had a declined cart and a leased SUV she couldn't afford. I told my mother I had to feed the baby, and I hung up while she was still talking. Something I had never once done to her in 34 years. When the mother fails, she sends the aunt. Aunt Denise texted me directly that afternoon, something she'd done maybe twice in my adult life, both times about a raffle. Her message was a paragraph of borrowed outrage, disgusted, barely getting by. "Cut them off while your father is sick. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you." The line about Eleanor almost got me because she was the one person in that family I never wanted to disappoint. Then I remembered her actual words. "Somebody has to watch this family's money, and your mother won't." I realized Denise had it exactly backwards, so I didn't write a paragraph back. I attached the single page, 12 rows, 9 years, and typed one sentence beneath it. "Here's where the money my sister-in-law says she manages on her own actually went. The Silver Creek withdrawals are hers. Ask her." I put the phone down and changed Lily's diaper one-handed with a calm I hadn't felt in a decade. The phone buzzed once with the little ellipsis of Denise typing. Then it stopped. No reply came. Not that hour, not that day. Because you can call a person dramatic, but you cannot call a column of withdrawals dramatic. It simply sits there being true. My mother, never out of moves, called a family dinner. The invitation came as a group text. "Let's all gather Sunday to welcome baby Lily and clear the air as a family. Claire, I hope you'll come so we can put this misunderstanding behind us." A misunderstanding. 5 days after she chose a cat over my newborn, it was a misunderstanding. Ryan read it over my shoulder. "You don't have to go. We could stay home and let them sit in it." He was right. But I knew what Sunday was actually for. It wasn't to welcome my daughter. It was to get me into a room full of relatives and pressure me back into caving, the way I always caved. She wanted an audience for my surrender, so I decided to give her the audience, just not the surrender. I texted back 2 words, "We'll come." Then I called Sydney, flew back from the cruise, and called me from the airport. And the call told me everything about how little had changed in her world while mine had been rebuilt from the studs. "Okay, so the cruise was kind of ruined," she announced. Before hello, before "are you all right?" I spent the whole time stressed about my card. I held the phone, looked at my daughter, and said nothing, which she took as permission to continue. "Mom said you had some meltdown and stopped the family money," which, fine, have your feelings. "But I have a launch coming, and I literally cannot function without the account. Can you just fix it before dinner tomorrow?" Fix it before dinner. As if my near death and my newborn's abandonment were an inconvenient clog in her content calendar. I asked her one quiet question. "Sydney, where do you think that money comes from?" A pause. The first real one I'd ever heard from her. "From Mom and Dad," she said, and it came out with a small upward lift at the end. A question disguised as an answer. "It's a family thing." I told her I'd see her tomorrow, and let her sit with it. Some bills you have to read yourself before you'll believe them. I need to back up a few hours to the part that hinges this whole story, because it happened before the dinner, the night of the accident, while Ryan was still in the air. My hospital room door opened slowly, and my grandfather walked in. Walter, 78, my mother's father, in a pressed flannel shirt buttoned to the throat, leaning on a cane he clearly resented. I hadn't told him which hospital. He called both in the area until he found me. Under his free arm, he carried a thick manila folder, soft and furred at the corners with age, bound with 2 crossed rubber bands gone brittle and pale. He set it on the foot of my bed like a man setting down something heavy he'd carried a very long way. "Your mother said you'd had a fender bender," he said. I drove past 3 exits before I believed her. He sat in the vinyl chair, folded his hands over the head of his cane, and said the sentence I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. I knew. I always knew. I asked him what he knew. "About the money," he said, looking at the folder, not at me. "All 9 years of it. About where your mother's been spending her afternoons. About what she told this family while you bled yourself dry." He tapped the folder once. "Not tonight, though. You've got enough tonight. We'll do this properly, in front of everyone, where she can't squirm out the side door." He was right. Some truths only count if they're told in a full room. Before he left that night, he gave me one piece of it, because he said I shouldn't walk into Sunday blind. My grandmother, Eleanor, his wife of 51 years, hadn't simply slipped away peacefully the way I'd been told. In her final year, she'd grown suspicious. She'd noticed my mother's spending, the new car, the casino talk. She'd stopped hiding it and started asking quiet questions about where the family's help was really coming from. She'd cornered Walter one evening and said, "Somebody is keeping Diane afloat, and it isn't us. Find out who." It took him a while. He's old, and banks aren't exactly eager to talk to him, but Walter had spent 40 years managing the books for a cattle operation, and he knows how to follow a number. He found me. He found 9 years of a granddaughter quietly wiring her whole margin into a hole her mother kept digging. Eleanor had wanted to fix it before she went. She ran out of time, so she did the next best thing. She spent her final clear months with a lawyer, and whatever she'd set in motion carried both her signature and Walter's, and an attorney believed it would hold. "A trust like the one we made," Walter told me, "does what we told it to do." He stood, gathered the folder back under his arm, and paused at the door. "She wasn't ashamed of you, Claire. Whatever your mother says on Sunday, your grandmother trusted you with everything. That's why she chose you." Then he was gone, and I didn't sleep at all that night. The day before the dinner, Walter came by the house, and I finally asked him the question that had haunted me my entire life. Why Sydney? Why had my mother spent 30 years treating one daughter like a prize and the other like a utility? He was quiet a while, turning his coffee cup. "You have to understand how Eleanor raised her," he said, and I braced myself, because I loved my grandmother and didn't want her made complicated. Eleanor was a hard woman. Fair mostly, but hard, and she had a favorite, and it wasn't your mother. It was your Uncle Danny, God rest him. Diane grew up being the one who managed things while Danny got the love. I felt the floor tilt. because I knew that role. I had lived that exact role. So when Diane had you, Walter went on, and you turned out steady and quiet and capable, just like she'd had to be, something in her couldn't stand it. And when Sydney came along, loud and needy and bright, Diane finally got to be the mother of the favorite instead of the forgotten one. She got to do for Sydney what nobody ever did for her. He set his cup down. It's not an excuse. It's just the shape of it. I sat with that. My mother wasn't a cartoon villain. She was a woman who had been the unloved, load-bearing wall in her own mother's house, and instead of breaking the pattern, she'd handed it down to me and crowned my sister in her own image. The casino, Walter said, was the only place she ever felt like she might win something she hadn't had to earn by being useful. I understood her completely. I was still done. That night, I decided exactly what Sunday would be and what it would absolutely not be. It would not be a screaming match. My mother is a virtuoso of volume, and the second I raised my voice, I'd be handing her the role she wanted, the hysterical, ungrateful daughter with a dozen witnesses to confirm it. I would not give her noise. I would give her paper. Here's the asymmetry I want you to notice, because it's the whole key to this story. My mother's only weapons were words. Lies told warmly, guilt delivered on schedule, a story performed for relatives. My weapons were a single printed page, a screenshot on my husband's phone, and a folder in my grandfather's careful hands. She would shout. I would set down documents. She would perform. I would let the numbers be witnessed. She traded in feeling. I would answer in fact in front of the exact audience she'd assembled to shame me. I'm not going to argue with her, I told Ryan in the kitchen while Lily slept. I'm going to show up, set it on the table, and let the paper talk. Are you sure you can stay calm knowing her? I thought about every dinner I'd swallowed, every check I'd sent, every time I'd managed her feelings instead of stating a fact. I've been calm my whole life, I said. Someday I just stopped being silent too. Those are different things. It had taken a truck, a cast, and a grandfather with a folder to teach me the difference. I packed the single printed page into Lily's diaper bag, tucked beneath the wipes where nobody would think to look. We drove to my parents' house, the house with the mortgage I'd believed I was helping pay, and I sat in the car a moment in the driveway, gathering myself. I still wore my cast, and around my wrist, the hospital ID band, 5 days old, gone soft and gray. I'd kept it on purpose. I peeled it off finally and tucked it into my coat pocket, because I wanted it on me, a small, hard piece of proof of exactly where I'd been the night my mother chose a cat. Ryan carried Lily's car seat. From the curb behind us came the slow, careful tap of a cane, and there was Walter, in his Sunday flannel, the worn manila folder pinned under his arm, its brittle rubber band still crossed. He'd insisted on arriving separately so my mother wouldn't see us together and brace for it. You ready? He asked on the porch. Through the window, I could see them all assembled. Aunt Denise and 2 cousins, my father in his chair, my mother moving among them, topping off coffee, playing wounded hostess in a kingdom I had financed without ever being crowned in it. Sydney sat on the arm of the couch scrolling her phone, sunburned, oblivious. I'm ready, I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it completely. Walter pushed the door open with the head of his cane, and we walked in out of the cold. 3 generations my mother least wanted in one room, carrying a baby, a cast, an ID band, and a folder. Conversation stopped. My mother turned with the coffee pot in her hand and her welcome smile already fixed in place. The evening began. My mother is, I'll give her this, a gifted performer. And she opened strong, setting down the coffee pot, pressing a hand to her chest, moving toward Lily with her eyes already glistening for the audience. Ryan angled the car seat away, gentle but immovable, and her reach turned into a flutter, then into Act 1. She turned to the relatives, not to me. I am just so relieved we're all here because this has been the hardest week of my life. Not the week I'd spent in a hospital bed. Hers. She told them her daughter had used an accident as an excuse to abandon her struggling, aging parents out of some imagined grievance. She dabbed her eyes. Aunt Denise nodded along, though she wouldn't quite meet my gaze. I noticed my 12 rows sitting somewhere in the back of her mind. My father stared at his hands. Sydney looked up, sensing the script had a part for her she hadn't rehearsed. Then my mother delivered her closer, the line that had won her every room for 30 years, turning to face me with wet, wounded eyes pitched perfectly for the cheap seats. I don't understand where this cruelty comes from. Your sister never has these emergencies. 4th time, in a warm, crowded room, with everyone watching, she handed me the exact sentence she'd used to leave my newborn alone, and had no idea she'd just loaded the gun and passed it to me, grip first. The room waited for me to cry, or shout, or crumble. I did none of it. I reached into the diaper bag, took out the single folded sheet, and set it flat on the dining table where the light from the fixture fell directly on it. "You're right, Mom," said in the same level voice I used to present a quarterly forecast. "Sydney never has these emergencies. I'd like to show everyone why." I slid the page to the center of the table. This is every dollar I sent this family for the last 9 years. $486,000 of them. The room went very still. The top rows are real. $65,000 for Dad's cardiologist and prescriptions. $11,000 toward this mortgage. I let that sit one beat. The rest is the part Mom tells you all she manages on her own. I touch the page, guiding their eyes. Not for drama, just precision. $290,000 in cash, withdrawn over 9 years. Almost all of it within 2 miles of the casino at Silver Creek. And $120,000 to Sydney, including $40,000 once filed under Dad's surgery, so nobody would ask about it. Sydney's head came up slowly. "That's where your card money comes from, Sid," I said gently, because none of this was ever her fault first. It came from me. It always came from me. My mother's performance had nowhere left to go. The tears she'd summoned for sympathy sat there, exposed, on a face caught in a full room. Her hand trembled around nothing. "It's handled," I said. 3 days of grief and 9 years of silence, compressed into 2 words, landed in that room like a gavel. She reached for her only remaining tool, calling me a liar, a thief, ungrateful, twisted. That is twisted. You've twisted everything. Your father and I never. That's when Walter set his cane against the table and laid the manila folder down beside my single page. The brittle rubber bands had to be coaxed off, grooves worn into the paper from a year of waiting. "I knew," he said to the relatives, not to his daughter. I always knew. Eleanor knew too. At the end, she had me trace it. He drew out a stapled document, a Boulder law firm's name stamped on the cover. "This is your grandmother's trust and mine. Last spring, Eleanor and I moved most of what we had into it. The land, this house which sits on our parcel, the accounts," he said it where everyone could hear. "It does not go to Diane. Diane doesn't manage a dollar of it. We left it to Claire and to the baby. There's a fund for Lily's schooling. The rest stays in trust, the way Eleanor wanted, where it can't be gambled away." He tapped the cover page. "My attorney says it stands. We made good and sure it stands." My mother's face did something I had never once seen it do. The wounded matriarch mask fell completely off, and underneath was raw panic. Because the house she was standing in, the kingdom she'd ruled, the story she'd performed for 30 years, had just been handed with 2 signatures to the daughter she'd left in a hospital bed. The room stopped looking at me. It looked at her. She cycled through everything else first, wept loudly and suddenly, then pivoted to my father. "Frank, are you going to let them do this to me? This was your mess too." My father flinched. For one moment, the same moment I'd glimpsed on the phone, he lifted his head. "Claire's right," he whispered. "Diane, the casino. You know, it's been—" My mother's head snapped toward him, a look 40 years in the making. He stopped, and I felt something in me let him go. Gently, for good. Abandoned even by her own silence, my mother turned to rage. "You'll regret this? I'll fight that trust. You can't just take a person's home, Walter answered, mild as milk. It was never your home, Diane. It was your mother's. And these things almost never go anywhere in court when the paperwork's clean. He was careful with the word almost. An honest man to the end. Sydney was crying real tears in the corner now. Not for me, but in the dawning horror of realizing the well had a bottom, and she'd been standing on the person carrying it. I stood slowly. The ribs still didn't allow for drama even when the moment called for it, and took Lily's car seat onto my lap. I reached into my coat pocket, took out the soft gray hospital band I'd worn for 5 days, and looped it once around the handle of my daughter's car seat, letting it rest there without a word. Not the bank app, not the spreadsheet, not the folder. That little band was the whole story, the night I nearly died, and my family checked a cruise schedule instead. My mother was still talking, threats sliding into pleading. Claire, honey, we can fix this. We're family. But her voice had stopped reaching me. The way a song stops mattering once you've finally left the room it's playing in. I turned to Aunt Denise, who had gone pale and quiet. Thank you for reading the numbers, Denise. I know you'll tell everyone the truth. Not a threat. A fact. She nodded. I looked at my father one last time. He met my eyes, and I gave him a small nod that meant I understand, and it's all right, and I'm still leaving. Ryan took the diaper bag. Walter gathered his folder and his cane. 3 generations my mother least wanted under one roof walked back out into the cold October evening, and I pulled the door shut behind us with my good hand. Softly, because slamming it would have meant I still wanted something from the people on the other side of it. I didn't. Here's how it settled, because I know you want to know. The trust held. My mother called 2 lawyers, and both told her the same thing. Clean paperwork and a competent grantor are very hard to beat. And the threats quietly stopped. She and my father still live in that house because the trust lets them stay there for the rest of their lives. I'm not in the business of putting an old man with a bad heart on the curb, whatever his silence cost me. But Silver Creek no longer runs on my margin, and a casino with no fresh money flowing in is just a sad room with carpet. Sydney got a real job at a marketing firm that doesn't care how many followers she has. Last I heard, she was slowly learning that a launch you fund yourself feels very different from one your sister quietly funded for you. She texted me once, months later, 3 words, "Where'd it go?" And I sent her the same single page. She never replied. She also never asked me for money again. Aunt Denise told everyone the truth, exactly as I knew she would. And the family chat went very quiet for a long while. My father calls sometimes, but only when he's alone in his car, and I always answer those calls. Yvette, the night nurse, stayed on for 2 weeks while my ribs healed, and she still sends Lily a card on her birthday. Walter sold his place across town and moved into a small rental 10 minutes from us, where he comes for Sunday dinner every single week and brings the folder every single time, setting it on my bookshelf like a reminder, in case anybody forgets. If there's one thing I learned from a hospital bed, a folder, and 4 taps on a banking app, it's this. The people who praise you for being the strong one are usually just naming the person they've quietly decided they'll never have to carry. And the day you stop being their bank is the day you finally get to be something better. For me, that meant simply being a mother to my own daughter, instead of a parent to everyone who refused to grow up. That's the story. 9 years, 1 folder, and the truth my whole family spent decades trying to bury. If this reminded you to pull one bank statement tonight and actually read it, or to think about who you'd really call from a hospital bed, take that as your sign and do it today. If you know someone who's always been cast as the strong one in their family, send them this video. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me what's the most satisfying, quiet moment of justice you've ever witnessed. Smash that like button, subscribe for more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.